I think the internet makes humanity look a lot more extreme than it probably is.
If I go on YouTube search, it's not always the best to find the things I want.
You download them to use your ticket, and then you delete them the minute you've got in the gate. Does UX matter anymore for an app if people actually never visit the app? Quite often I'll listen to a podcast and then actually, 95% of it kind of slips straight out.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Attention Shift podcast. I'm glad to say that I'm joined again by Andy Marston, and Andy's agreed to be my permanent co-host. Thank God, Andy, for bailing me out.
Cheers, Ed. It's nice to be here and glad to get like a regular cadence going on this as well.
No, it's good, thank you. Yeah, look, we talk in similar spaces, but also different spaces too, so it's good to have different opinions, and I know that we will disagree on a number of things as well as agree on things too, so yeah, it's going to be interesting, but thank you so much for agreeing to join us permanently.
Yeah, it's great, and Friday's highlight reel, I guess, was the first kind of signal of that as well, because a lot of the stuff we spoke about last week ended up featuring in the newsletter, and I think the first topic we're going to cover this week as well was the main story on Friday.
So look, let's jump straight into that first story then. So Tennis Australia, they're broadening their remit to become a sports event organiser. So we all know that they organise, obviously, their own events anyway with the Melbourne event, right? But they've now announced a new partnership with the PGA Tour for the 2028 President's Cup. So Tennis Australia bringing their event delivery expertise to one of golf's most prestigious international tournaments. And this is really interesting, right? That for an organisation that's very much been about one sport, really leaning in to help organise another sport as well.
Yeah, so I mean, what I thought was quite interesting is a few stories that I've looked at before. Quite recently looked at Wimbledon, who did their Wimbledon Court Invitational, which is essentially like a doubles tournament with former players. I think they had Andre Agassi and Jeannie Bouchard, and essentially leveraged that as like an extension of the Wimbledon brand, where they played in Central Park in New York just before the tournament. And so you kind of extend the window in which your event is relevant, and you're extending the calendar, because I guess the challenge for any of the Grand Slams is you own a window, and then it's how do you create relevance the rest of the year. And so like Tennis Australia did a really good job of that back in January. I know a lot of people spoke positively about like things like the 1 Point Slam, which they created, which essentially gave them like new IP that they could add on like the week before the tournament starts. So suddenly people care from the start of January maybe rather than midway through January about what's going on. But what I think is interesting here is you've essentially taken, there's pulling audiences towards the brand and extending the calendar, and then there's also pushing out your internal expertise and saying like, how do we take what's existed as a cost center within the organization and actually provide that externally to, in this case, another sports rights holder, and deliver something where you're saying, we only need probably this expertise for 1 month of the year in particular. And so like, what I think is quite interesting is from a calendar perspective, this is happening in December. So I wonder if there's also like an economies of scale element to it in terms of there'd be a lot of volunteer staff and a lot of people that probably come on board for the Grand Slam that don't work for Tennis Australia the rest of the year. Maybe there's a way to extend those contracts where it's like a 2-month window that you have access to this talent and you're just employing them from December through to February. But yeah, curious how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you think about all of the infrastructure that you put in place in an organisation like this that's then only used for a relatively small window when you're actually in delivery phase, ticketing and sponsorships and corporate hospitality, fan experiences and all the different relationships that you've built, they've obviously thought, hang about a minute here, we can extend this, but there's no more space really in the tennis calendar because there's plenty of stuff going on around the world, and the tennis juggernaut then moves on to somewhere else and moves on to somewhere else. But then in sports that are that work in a similar kind of cadence where they move around the world, if they can make the calendar work, it makes total sense almost to lift and shift. And look, and there may even be sort of crossovers, right, of demographics between tennis and golf that they see real economies of scale as well. So it does make sense. And I suppose it begs the question, like, why has no one really thought to do this kind of thing before, or why very few people thought to do this kind of thing before? Because I guess from obviously the CEO, Craig Tilley's perspective, he's looking at this going, we can actually make use of the resource we've got available better.
Yeah, there's a few examples I can think of in other areas. Maybe not necessarily the events team, but like Miami Heat, for example, an
True.
interesting one where they took their internal resources around kind of internal digital transformation and said, all right, we've done this for ourselves. Does this apply across to other organizations and franchises that all have pretty similar problems to ourselves? I know Southampton tried to do something where they basically took their creative team, which was called Turf, and they essentially took that and then spun it out as its own agency so that it could deliver for other clients.
Yeah, we've seen some of the US sort of multi-organization ownership groups as well that have, whereas it used to be they were very much within their own sport, have started now to branch out into not just sort of variants of their own, where you've got the men's and the women's, but actually going on into other, like the group that obviously owns Arsenal and the LA Rams as well. Like we're seeing this more and more, but on a sort of a small event basis, this looks pretty unique in that sense. I say small event, the big events, but I mean small windows.
Yeah, I guess what will be interesting is like this is obviously a one-off. So President's Cup moves around; it doesn't stay in Melbourne every year.
Yeah.
There's a big thing in the press release about how this is like amplifying visibility of Melbourne. So like there's other kind of like halo effect for Tennis Australia in terms of making Melbourne look great as well. In terms of like tourism maybe as well. Like you come over in December, you watch the golf, you stay and you watch the tennis. So I'm interested to see what their next customer looks like or their next client looks like, because this is a one-off, but they've also deliberately spun out an events team, which makes me think they're not just doing it for this one-off occasion. So I'm curious what like client number 2 looks like that allows them to leverage this expertise for different points of the calendar and for maybe events that are on a more regular cadence.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, you've got Melbourne is sports city, right? There's a lot that goes on, so maybe they're looking at some of the other Melbourne events that already happened, but like I say, bringing other new ones there as well. And I think if they are working with the local governmental institutions as well to help fund and support doing that, which again wouldn't be unusual because we see that happen in other parts of the world, it makes sense for them to do that. Cool. Okay, then, so next story. So Forbes have just released some research around their top creators list. And there's a suggestion here that the top 50 creators in the world generated $1 billion in revenue. So Mr. Beast tops that list again, right, with 300 million. But I guess there's a bigger structural story at play here, because you've got people like iShow Speed doing what they're doing, and with his big Expedia deal that he did. I think this jump of the creator economy being more about advertising. Now, it used to be let's partner so we can get our brand on there, and actually these creators now realising that they need to build multifaceted businesses to be able to give themselves longevity is starting to play out more and more now. And now you start to see these playbooks start to be picked up by other creators, even from when they start. They're thinking about it right from the start about how they structure their businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's quite interesting is when you look at the top YouTubers, they all have quite an interesting mix, like quite a holistic mix. So like you mentioned there, right? Mr. Beast obviously is the most prolific of them, but like he obviously has Feastables, and he has his like consumer packaged goods products that he can sell en masse to a huge global audience. And like I've started to notice things like Lunchables and Feastables more and more in supermarkets, even in the UK. I'm sure they're even more prolific in the North American market. But then he also has like huge advertisements with the right brands. And I think actually it's not about necessarily saying I want to own every single business that I partner with. It's about finding the right mix of like, where can I add value, or where can I own the stack and say I'm going to sell this product, and where am I actually better off partnering with a huge brand that actually maybe gives me something, right? Like maybe it's additional exposure if I partner with an airline that like my show's now on their channel when people are flying, or like maybe it's a partnership with a TV deal with a TV company like Amazon, where actually the people that aren't seeing Mr. Beast on YouTube that are on Amazon Prime now see his game show there and become curious. So I think it's the mix that I think is probably the most kind of interesting takeaway. But
yeah, and I think like look, if you look at Feastables or Lunchables in their own right, look, as far as I'm aware, he doesn't own the business that's producing all of those products. So the reality is it is a licensing deal for him, and then percentages get pretty tight on things like that. But the reality is he is then able to be viewed in people's day-to-day life, and it keeps his brand certainly top of mind. I think, and the reality is you get to the point where all of these things are driving each other to and are interlinked, as you're explaining. So I think it's important then that you do appear in those different settings to ensure that your brand does remain top of mind. And I think if you look at what Coca-Cola's always done as a brand, right? Like they just keep, it's like that constant drip just to stay there all the time. So whenever you think about, I'm going to have a drink, you think, well, I'm going to have a Coke. Yeah. And he's clearly starting to try and do that with all these different deals that he's been announcing over the last, 6 to 12 months, right? 'Cause he's done a number of different things, like the creator platform that he created as well. He's trying to ensure that he's really capitalising on the brand that is Mr. Beast. But like he said as well, he's made like a million mistakes, and he will continue to make mistakes too. And it's like, when we make a mistake, okay, work out what we did and try again. But I think what he is doing is, the way he's coming along and the way other creators have come along now, those that come after him then are going, okay, we don't have to make the same mistakes that they made, and we can actually, we're not going to make the same revenue that they've made, but actually we can make businesses out of this and earn a living from this in a way that you could never have done this even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think probably the throwback analogy would be Disney. I just listened to a podcast actually from Acquired, who do really good breakdowns of successful businesses, and they just did an episode on Disney. They talk about the flywheel of content and commerce and how it all interlinks. And there's a diagram, I don't know if you've seen it, of like the sort of Disney flywheel, where it's kind of showing how the content at Disney then feeds, and the music then feeds the TV shows, and then that all feeds into the parks and the merch and the licensing, and everything kind of creates this loop. It's a really good podcast, and a lot of what the creators are doing now is essentially their own version of that kind of like Disney flywheel. Yeah. Where you're sometimes taking a trade-off where you're saying, I'll do this TV show with ABC because it's going to give me visibility into this market.
Yeah.
And then like there's an example in it where like they had already built the castle for Sleeping Beauty in Disneyland 3 years before Sleeping Beauty came out, which meant that there was already a familiarity with it for a load of their customers when it launched, because they're essentially able to like soft launch it in the parks. So yeah, it's really fascinating episode, but well worth a listen.
We'll get that in the show notes actually. So we're on when you come to our website for the pod, we can put a link in there as well, so people can go and have a listen to that themselves as well. No, but it is really interesting. You can see how that's now being taken on by these creators as well. Yeah. Okay, then cool. So next story. So back to tennis again. So Wimbledon have just signed a new TV deal. They'll be staying with the BBC for the foreseeable future. I can't ever imagine a world where the Wimbledon are not with the BBC, to be brutally honest. I think they are very much interlinked. And you can see just by the way the content's made, that they have Wimbledon presenters who are doing the interviews on court. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But it's interesting that they are looking at how, and as the BBC often do, we covered it last week, right? They're not just looking about, how does it manifest itself in linear broadcasting, but also new technologies, fresh storytelling, new verses, just different ways that they can look to present Wimbledon for how audiences are consuming content today.
Yeah, I think we're seeing this with pretty much every rights holder at the moment in terms of like a consolidation around owning the audience and trying to provide value. I think on the World Cup side, I think the FA did something quite interesting with the squad announcements where they
in the app
basically said pre-squad announcement, if you go on and predict it, you can win tickets to one of the England matches, which, for this World Cup in particular is a potentially very expensive prize. Yeah. So I think what the FA did there in terms of leveraging something that's a one-off moment where they have the inside scoop before everyone else, and even if, it's potentially getting leaked somewhere, by tying it into the predictor game, there was like a reason to check in anyway. Was interesting. So I think it's about rights holders figuring out like what do they have that's of genuine value to fans that they can then push through to the app, because I think too often with various rights holder apps, you download them to use your ticket and then you delete them the minute you've got in the gate, because you don't actually have anything else kind of tying you back to needing to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously from a BBC perspective, what they're doing around BBC Sport, obviously they've got the stuff that we talked about that they've got going on around the World Cup at the moment, but similarly I've not really seen the same level of engagement around Wimbledon, but maybe I've just missed it because tennis is not my first love. They have got this, yeah, they have got, yeah, it's intentional as well. They have got this ongoing, obviously, nature of all the different sports that they have, and your reality is like you will be interested in multiple sports, some that you'll like more than others, and some that you'll be more engaged in more than others. And the way that they've done what they've done with the World Cup, they haven't quite done the same with Wimbledon at the moment as well. But you can see them start to lean that into that. And I imagine whatever deal they have done with Wimbledon will allow them to probably flex their muscles. Because obviously, as we know, right, IBM have been involved with Wimbledon for a long, long time now. And I know that from a bit of work we did a few years ago, IBM in a lot of ways do call the shots there at Wimbledon in terms of what people can and can't do from a digital content technology perspective. So it'd be interesting to see how they're also working together with the BBC on this as well.
Mm-hmm. I think on the IBM thing, like one of the apps that gets so much admiration, particularly across the industry, where it's maybe more central to people's kind of thoughts and interest, is like the work that IBM do with the Masters. So the Masters are always like a best in class example of like a rights holder app. And interesting, I was speaking to a different rights holder, DP World Tour. Mark Shannon came on the podcast. He works on the digital products team. But what I thought was quite interesting is like as we're moving towards LLMs and AI models, people are sticking more into the models. So like, why leave perplexity if you can just ask the questions there? And so like one question he had that I thought was quite interesting was talking about like, does UX matter anymore for an app? If people actually never visit the app, does it actually just become like an official data source for the LLMs to scrape from? And so like the way that you present information on the app actually maybe changes in terms of what the app's purpose is. Because
when people... Yeah, I guess, so obviously when we go into apps, we generally find a curated world, but actually does it become more of a hybrid or even less curated now that people effectively go in and start asking questions, and then it starts presenting to you based on the questions you're asking, starts to learn actually the kind of things that you are. So it's still curated but in a different kind of way. And then this personalisation that we've been talking about for feels like centuries actually starts to happen based on that.
Yeah, like could it just be that when you open the app, you just get a search box in the middle of the page and like there's nothing else on the page, and it's just like it could be where are the bathrooms if you're at Augusta and you're trying to figure out, or it could be what time's first tee off. Like, but actually, rather than have to navigate through 8 pages to find the information you're looking for, it's all at your fingertips. So actually, at that point, the thing that matters the most is like the cleanliness of the data that you're putting into the app.
And the cleanliness, like you say, because ultimately, if it's not clean enough and it's not giving you the answers you need, then it loses all credibility, and then it's done.
Yeah, and that's where the rights holder has value over a generic LLM, because ultimately the LLM is picking up information from everywhere on the internet, which might not always be up to date. Like if you ask Perplexity for Tottenham transfer news, it might bring you up stuff that like happened 3 years ago. If you don't prompt it properly. Whereas actually, if you have a rights holder that cleans the data up properly, then maybe that's where the value is like the API connection through to, so you add Wimbledon to your LLM, and actually it then connects with your Wimbledon account.
It makes sense, and then gives you access to all the different things that are going on at Wimbledon, and some that wouldn't obviously be connected in a normal world. Cool. Okay. Well, so kind of in the world of opinion. So Meta apparently is now building an app to be able to do prediction markets themselves, but at the same time, they're also talking to Calcium Polymarket too. So I've been chatting about prediction markets for quite a bit over the last year or so. In simple terms, it's just asking people to put money behind their opinion. So apparently Mark Zuckerberg has directed Meta executives to explore partnerships or investment talks with some of these prediction markets, but also I think they're retaining the ability to be able to build it themselves as well. So it's interesting, right? Because in theory, and we chatted a little bit about that off camera, right, that Facebook should know what the opinion is of most of the people on the planet at most points of the day, but they've not necessarily monetized it in this way so far. But is this missing the point of why people use Facebook products? Will people then feel less likely they're going to use Facebook products if they feel like it's been monetized in this kind of way.
Yeah, so I think in terms of understanding sentiment or opinion, I think social media is not always the best barometer of that, because I think you get the two kind of polar ends of the scale. And I think generally when people sit in the middle, they tend not to share that opinion on Facebook or any other social media platform, because that's not what the algorithm's looking for.
Well, and they don't want to get shouted at as well.
Yeah, so I think you kind of miss out on, like, the bulk of the population won't share their opinion. And so I think the internet makes humanity look a lot more extreme than it probably is. I think what's kind of interesting when you add in money behind it through a prediction market is you potentially kill off some of that hype, because it's one thing to say you think Cape Verde are going to win the World Cup, but it's another thing to say I'm going to actually put money on Cape Verde to win the World Cup. So if you can see how people are allocating their capital behind their opinion, that potentially gives you a better understanding of how much conviction sits with that opinion versus just for the sake of, I don't know, creating some rage online, they've decided to say that they really like or really dislike a certain thing. But yeah, I do think it's a slightly strange business for Meta to involve themselves in so directly.
I guess the reason that they're looking to involve themselves is in June alone there was $44.8 billion traded. So I think they're just looking at it as this is a revenue stream we're missing out on. But interestingly as well, I mean, I don't know where they're at the moment, calcium polymarket, but the last time I looked, they weren't making money yet. But what they were doing is building data insights about, well, certainly the populations where they can operate. There's a pretty unique data set that they can sell then to any brand, political organisation, about how people do think about all manner of things. And I think that's where they have seen some real revenue generation coming through for them. But I guess, is Zuck just looking at this going, this is a revenue stream we need to have a part of?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think there's also an element of when you're a publicly traded company and you need to be shown to be growing at all times, there's probably also just a narrative element. We need to be seen to be proactively growing in these different areas. And actually, if there's a narrative that Meta might go in and own the prediction market space or might own a big chunk of the market share in that space, the same way he's gone really aggressively at AI researchers, even though I don't think Meta are the front runners to win that race, there's an element of he needs to be seen to be proactive in these categories in order to maintain investor confidence.
Yeah, especially after the money that was spent on the virtual world that never became anything. He's got to be, I suppose, like you say, he's got to be seen to be backing whatever the next horse is that's likely to win a race.
Yeah, I guess you just have to take multiple bets, right? Sometimes they're not always going to pay off.
Absolutely, yeah.
And obviously they had a very high profile miss with that bet, but it was a bet that Apple made as well, and
yeah, true.
And Snapchat are making that same bet, so it's not necessarily that it won't go anywhere. But yeah, I think it's probably just a case of when you're a company of that size and you've explored so many different options, you kind of have to be looking at these things. And one thing Zuckerberg has done well is his acquisition record is pretty decent in terms of WhatsApp and Instagram and other tools. So I think I wouldn't necessarily say that it won't be a success if Meta go into the prediction space. I think they could potentially have a lot of success, but it does feel slightly off-brand compared to some of the other stuff that they've done.
Yeah, it does feel a bit more in your face, to be fair. Whereas it's they've certainly given the sense of that we let everyone have their conversation, we don't get involved. At that point when they start monetizing, you're getting really involved with what the conversation is then, because ultimately you want it to go in a certain direction to ensure that you are monetizing it, because you've got a commercial angle to it. Whereas at the moment most things happen in the background without us really realizing how they're happening.
Yeah, it's a bit more blatant, I guess, in terms of monetizing through advertising. People have kind of got used to.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you get thrown because you get an advert that you're just well, that's very personal. Like I was chatting about, I don't know, going on holiday to Croatia, and now I've suddenly got a Croatia holidays tour guide advertisement coming up like every time I flick through Instagram. So like sometimes it does throw you a little bit. But I think in general, people are kind of okay when it's kind of passive monetization. I think the UK has seen the impact that the betting industry has had on particularly young men, but the entire population to a large extent. And I think the US is now going through that process of like massive growth as they deregulate sports betting, and prediction markets have been able to usurp a lot of those regulations. So I guess my worry would be just making sure that if you do have something like that, it's safeguarding protections are in place for younger users.
Yeah, it feels like at the moment that regulation has not really worked out how to regulate this, and it's just all happening in front of them, and they've not really jumped on it. So I think, that is a worry that it suddenly it makes almost easier to bet because it's not called betting than because you look at the betting industry and the amount of regulation they are actually under around what you can bet and when you can bet and how often you can bet. At the moment with this, as far as I'm aware, there's no regulation whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a bit like the gaming discussions around the like Ultimate Team card packs, where you kind of got the loot boxes, right? Where people start to talk about that because it's essentially a form of gambling to some degree. I think there's an interesting discussion to be had. Obviously, it's growing really fast, and I do think there are some really positive opportunities that come out of prediction markets in terms of better understanding sentiment than maybe if you were to go off just social media chatter alone. I think for predicting political outcomes, etc., they have actually been way more effective than polls in the last couple of years in doing that. But it's just, there's a caveat there in terms of safeguarding and how you roll that out in a responsible way, which I guess is even more of an obligation for someone like Meta because of the kind of wide usage that they have across the board.
And past data indiscretions.
You said it, not me.
Allegedly. I don't know. Was it allegedly? When you're from anyway. Right. Last story then. So YouTube has overtaken Reddit as the most served content in AI search. So I think Reddit's been used in AI searches for quite some time now. But what YouTube have done now is they've made their threaded comments and chat more easily accessible to AI search. And interestingly, AI models now are specifically favouring niche creators with videos longer than 10 minutes, which is reversing years of all being told that shorts are driving short form dominance. So it's interesting, really, isn't it, that the AI search is starting to do this now, and at some point, I'm sure it'll be looking at transcripts of what's in videos as well.
Yeah, I think there's a massive opportunity for AI to understand and transcribe and summarize video content and podcasts. Like quite often I'll listen to a podcast and then actually, 95% of it kind of slips straight out the other side. So actually, if you could listen to a podcast and then ask AI for a summary of like the top 5 talking points from that podcast, I think there's a lot of value to that. I think in terms of YouTube overtaking Reddit, like obviously Gemini is one of the most popular models and has a close relationship through Google with YouTube. So there may be some element of benefit in terms of being able to work closely together on kind of like both just understanding how the LLM works and how to then adapt the content and threads feed so that it's more easily readable. But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting to consider kind of how that becomes like a new source for the LLMs around getting kind of more context on certain topics.
Definitely, I think, and it's going to be a really interesting way of discovery for creators ultimately if they can start getting found like that. Because, like you said there, if you can just go and ask whatever AI search tool you use to give you videos about certain, look, it might like the video you want to watch might be about business learnings around. It could be any manner of special interest that you've got. and to be able to then go and ask that, like you said, and potentially it's chat at the moment or comments at the moment, but also from transcripts too, and be able to go and find these specific videos at specific points in time as well. Because at the moment, if you want to go and look for it, I don't know about you, but if I go on YouTube search, it's not always the best to find the things I want. You generally find things more because YouTube suggests it to you rather than you search it yourself, because the YouTube search in itself is, it's bloody hard to find anything, quite frankly. So that needs a bit of work. But maybe their point is, well, actually people search for stuff in other places and we don't have to worry about that as much.
Yeah, I think videos kind of become more common as a result, even just on the Google search bar, right? If you search for something like how to do X, generally speaking, there'll be like a YouTube answer on like how to use a piece of software or how to, I don't know, complete a certain DIY task around the house.
Yeah.
Like generally video actually works better for a lot of that stuff. So I think it will definitely force a change maybe in the types of content people are making. If the lean is more towards video content, and also there's like an easier way to translate that back through. And then I also wonder if there's an element of like, there's just so much written content now because of how easy it is to produce on AI that actually there's an element of trust there through video, because video has like that extra barrier in terms of creation.
At the moment.
At the moment. Yeah.
How long that lasts for remains to be seen. Cool. Thanks, Andy, for that. So just before we go as well, obviously this pod will come out on Wednesday. Friday, tell us about the event.
Yeah, so it was a couple weeks back when I hosted the last Sports Pundit Social. John Grabowski, who's part of the Sports Pundit group, dropped me a note to see if I wanted to do a watch-along event with Dagenham. Obviously, Dagenham have kind of come into the frame a lot more since announcing their own kind of creator collaboration with KSI Investing, probably 3 or 4 months ago now. I think Dagenham might have been one of the teams he used to play with when he did a lot of FIFA content, and so there's
I think it was,
a nice tie-in there. And so when John made this offer, I thought it would be a fun one to put together kind of like a watch-along event, and then, as is the case with pretty much everything I do on Sports Pundit, it quickly grew into something much bigger. So I was like, maybe we could put some content on beforehand, and then it suddenly evolved into 5 panels beforehand. So it's basically I would say it's kind of like a hybrid between a watch-along or social event like the meetups that happen in London and the speakers-only event, which is kind of like an intimate, closed-off workshop, which is invite-only. So yeah, I would say it's a chance for people to get together. We'll probably borrow a lot from the speakers-only format in terms of making it more of a workshop, which I think we'll have maybe 50 or so people in the room. So like a decent number without being completely overwhelmed, and a chance to chat specifically about kind of where football meets media. And I think John's also got an announcement to make around something Dagenham are working on with DAZN.
Cool.
So that should be exciting.
Cool. Look forward to it. I'll see you on Friday then. I look forward to that.
Yeah, see you on Friday.
Cool. So thank you for joining us this week on this episode of The Attention Shift. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you want to feature as a guest, give us a question via our email, hello@attentionshift.media. I've been Ed Abbis. This has been Andy Marston. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.